reflect upon the past glories and forthcoming excitement of Wimbledon. Live from the All England Lawn Tennis Club with BBC Television and Radio 5 Live. An unrivaled team with unbeatable coverage of this illustrious tournament. Who will take the coveted Men's Challenge Cup or the Ladies' Venus Rosewater Dish? Wimbledon coverage begins Monday at midday on BBC 2 and 1:15 on Radio 5 Live.
Monica Seles talks about her comeback in the new issue of Radio Times, which also contains complete listings for all TV and major satellite channels.
Saturday night on BBC1. At 5:35, they're putting on a brave front.
Stop it, babe. Stop it.
On the home front in Dad's Army. At 7:05, there's one woman.
She's always got to interfere. She's driving me crazy.
Stallone finds hard to resist. His mom.
We're gonna nail those turkeys.
The Bugs team reach breaking point at 8:30.
I know exactly what's happened to you.
And?
It'll blow your mind.
At 9:20, Carol Smiley presents a lottery rollover with special guest Liza Minnelli. And at 9:35, Bob's back on form.
See, no joke books, I can still ad-lib.
And on the spot. Saturday night on BBC1.
Catty comedy at 30,000 feet on BBC 2 in a moment, Living the High Life. Here on BBC 1, the main evening news with Peter Sissons at 9 o'clock.
Europe gives Britain a framework for lifting the beef ban, and Britain calls off hostilities. John Major says he's got what he wanted, but other leaders warn that Britain's tactics won't be forgiven. Clashes tonight in Belfast as protesters try to stop an orange parade. And can they do it again? The tension mounts as England plot Spain's downfall. Good evening. John Major declared a ceasefire today in Britain's blocking battle with Europe after securing a deal that maps out the way to an eventual lifting of the beef ban. He said he was very happy at getting what Britain wanted earlier than originally seemed possible. But other European leaders at the summit in Florence said Britain would pay the price for its obstructive tactics, and opposition spokesmen at home attacked the deal because it didn't set out any kind of timetable for resuming beef exports. The government insisted that the timetable was in Britain's hands. The ban would be lifted step by step as Britain implemented the plan to eradicate BSE.
Malcolm.
The moment the Chancellor Kenneth Clarke heard the news from the Foreign Secretary Malcolm Rifkind.
Yep, sure. Which that's in the bag.
The deal that's caused the Prime Minister and other European leaders so much agony to put together was at last in place, and with relief, Mr Major and his counterparts went off to lunch, knowing that the British veto on EU business could now be lifted.
We've reached a satisfactory agreement. Much earlier, I think, than otherwise we would have done so, and I'm extremely pleased about that. I think everybody wanted to see whether a sensible, rational, common-sense agreement could be reached, and I think that is precisely what we've managed to obtain today, and I'm very pleased about that.
The process of lifting the ban will involve 5 stages, each subject to tough conditions. Cattle from herds certified to be free of BSE may be allowed for export first, then cattle embryos, and later animals under 30 months. But there's no guarantee that any stage will be approved. The precise terms of the deal were established in the minutes before the summit began. The Italian Prime Minister Romano Prodi, chairing the talks, secured the Foreign Secretary's approval of the official text. But only minutes later, Chancellor Kohl of Germany, who'd just been given his copy, decided he didn't like it, and he marched round to get it changed. It was only a matter of a few words, but they made the difference for him between Germany accepting the plan at face value and it keeping open the possibility of tougher conditions in the future. Behind the scenes, German diplomats, including the German ambassador to the EU, were relaying the details to Bonn. It'll be a hard sell in a health-conscious nation, so ensuring no automatic easing of the ban was vital.
Alles, was kommen kann.
Germany's Foreign Minister Klaus Kinkel told German journalists that any loosening of the ban would depend on science, on agriculture ministers and on veterinary experts, that there were plenty of what he called breaks built into the system. In France, too, there's resistance to a deal. This was the scene in Strasbourg last night. So the pressure for hard bargaining with Britain remains high. The Foreign Secretary encountered that when he announced what he described as a major concession to Britain, that Britain may be allowed to sell beef to countries outside Europe.
If third country writes to the United Kingdom and says, we want to buy British beef, up till now we've had to say, sorry, cannot do. European law prevents us. We now have it agreed that the Commission will be able to look at that.
But amid the relief among leaders at reaching agreement, several governments have rejected Mr. Rifkin's view on exports. Officials say they can't imagine declaring British beef safe enough to be traded outside Europe, but not inside it. It's an issue far from settled. At the end of it all, a deal is finally in place, and there is now a clearly agreed system for a step-by-step lifting of the export ban. The problem for the government, though, is that that system is so hedged around by checks, inspections and committees that getting each step lifted will be a long and difficult negotiation. David Shookman, BBC News, Florence.
Well, joining me now from Florence is our political editor, Robin Oakley. Robin, the opposition are attacking the deal because it has no dates attached. Do ministers have a time frame in mind?
Well, we'll start to see Mr Major talk about a time frame when he reports to the Commons on Monday, I think. Ministers are well aware that the great weakness of their scheme so far has been the lack of a date. They're aware of farmers' impatience. I think Mr Major, when he makes his statement, will start talking about the early autumn, perhaps, as a possibility for sales from authenticated grass-fed herds and the possibility of sales to third countries outside Europe. But there is a lot of potential for trouble in all the checks and committees and certification that David Shookman's report was talking about.
Now, the other potential for trouble, of course, is in party terms. Is it possible to begin assessing the political balance sheet for the Prime Minister?
I think we can start to do that after Florence, and he certainly got out of Florence a slightly better-looking deal than appeared to be available when he came. I think what we have seen is that the Tory Eurosceptics have been rather quieter than many of us had expected over this issue, partly because they've liked the government taking a more vigorous attitude with Europe. Even though they'd have liked it to be more vigorous still, they're not going to be too critical over this. We've seen, I think, a greater division between the parties. Although Labour supported the government out of national interest in the non-cooperation policy, this stage of the political battle, and Mr Blair's speech in Bonn this week, a strongly pro-European speech, have, I think, widened the dividing lines on Europe between the parties. The other part, I think, of the assessment is that the Eurosceptics in the Tory party, and ministers too, are pretty disappointed that with a public mood which is quite aggressive towards Europe, they've seen no improvement at all in their opinion poll standing while this beef war has been fought.
You know, in a nutshell, Robin, is the reaction of other EU leaders saying Britain will pay a high price for this going to faze the Prime Minister?
It's not going to faze him. He's entirely unrepentant about it. I think he knows that nobody will be going out of their way to do him favours in Europe as they did when he first took over from Lady Thatcher. But there's been a bit of a grudging respect from the way Britain has behaved, I think. People may think Britain is no longer the country of fair play, but they reckon Britain has played this in the way that some other countries might well have done too.
Robin Oakley in Florence. Thank you. The government's new laws withdrawing welfare benefits from most asylum seekers have been ruled illegal by the Court of Appeal. The judges upheld an appeal which argued that the Social Security Secretary, Peter Lilly, had overstepped his powers. The court said the effect of the regulations would be to leave some asylum seekers so destitute that no civilised nation could tolerate it.
Since early February, only those applying for asylum the moment they arrive in the UK have been able to claim state benefits while their case is considered. The changes were made, said ministers, to save social security costs of £200 million a year and to discourage the growing number of bogus asylum seekers. But the Court of Appeal's judgment that the Social Security Secretary acted beyond his powers is a significant victory for those who challenged the benefit cuts. They hope it'll help more than 30,000 asylum seekers, and they claim it's thrown the government's asylum policy into disarray.
They will now have to pause and think just where asylum policy is going. Do they want to continue associating asylum seekers with benefit fraud and other issues like that? Or do they want to bring compassion and decency back into asylum procedure? We believe this is a sea change judgment.
Central to the case was Ms. B, who fled Zaire after escaping imprisonment there following the murder of her husband, a political activist. She claimed asylum on the day she came to Britain, but because she didn't do it immediately as she arrived on a Eurostar train, she lost her right to benefits under the regulations. Facing another appeal next week, she remains anonymous.
She's happy about today's case, that everything went all right, and hopefully next week, she's expecting that everything will go fine again.
One of the appeal court judges, Lord Justice Simon Brown, didn't mince his words. He said the regulations could leave some asylum seekers so destitute that, to my mind, no civilised nation can tolerate it. Before bringing the benefit cuts in, the Department of Social Security said that even a temporary halt to the regulations would mean £3 million worth of computer changes alone. Immediately after the judgment, a spokesman for the department said it would be considering an appeal.
The government has a responsibility to protect this country from uncontrolled immigration to a honeypot, generous welfare state, and that is what was happening. We did put a stop to it. We apparently, according to the Court of Appeal, haven't done it in the correct way. We will now address how to do it in the correct way.
As many families await the outcome of their asylum applications, it's likely outstanding benefit claims will be reviewed in the light of the judgment. Clarence Mitchell, BBC News.
British scientists have developed a revolutionary new method for destroying the world's most deadly chemical weapons. The 9 o'clock news has been given unique access to film the process, which can convert lethal nerve agents into harmless waste, like water and carbon dioxide. Our defence correspondent Tom Carver reports.
Porton Down, a secret military base, once masterminded Britain's chemical weapons programme. Now its scientists are helping to destroy chemical weapons around the world. They are about to enter a laboratory containing 15 litres of mustard gas. A few droplets are enough to incapacitate a man. Using a harmless vapour, they test their masks. To prevent any chemicals escaping, they first enter an airlock before the laboratory. These are the first pictures to be taken inside the experiment. This is the riskiest moment. Even with all their precautions, the scientists work as fast as possible. The mustard gas, which is fed in at one end of the installation, passes through the network of pipes, where it is gradually broken down by other chemicals.